Greetings, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you once again for pressing play on this addendum video. I hope most of you managed to watch the original video of My Life in Nigeria, the booklet that my mum produced in anticipation of making a full book, had she been able to do that. It was a video that I hadn't intended to manage in one hit, and I was pleased that I did so. It ran for 2 hours of reading the book, or 2 hours, 5 minutes, and then 25 minutes of an impromptu eulogizing by myself in honor of my father and my mother. And when I listened back to the video, of course there were things I noticed which I wished I would have included. But on the whole, I think I was satisfied with it, considering its great length and all the various moving parts that were involved. It could have had only minor improvements, so I was pleased. However, I had at one point considered re-recording it, but on another listen I decided that the original had its own charms and quirks, and that I should keep it as is. And it occurred to me today that what I could do is simply add on an addendum to the bits that I felt could be embellished for people who are purists and really into the historical precision that sometimes was omitted. So another thing that I had wished for in the other video was to have started it earlier, a little bit earlier, to capture a little bit more light. I thought perhaps it would all take about an hour and a half, and of course I didn't have to, but I was pleased to embellish as I went along, because I think if you watched it you could tell I was really getting into the reliving the past there with my mother and father. I tell you, when I go through those words I can see every last, it's in high definition chrome. And so where do we stand now? You can see that I've got a new cover since the last recording, with a nice outline of Nigeria. And this is available as you click on the link that I've sent you, the streaming, the original link that was for the streaming of the funeral. Other than that, it stands as it was before. The main part, of course, being the the contents, location, dates and duration, and the 28 years that we went through of my mother's life in Nigeria. So as I went through, as I said, I decided perhaps there was just some things that I could add, and to get some daylight, to balance it out. A lot of it was in the dark, even though it came out okay. And I guess the first section that I could add to is just to dwell a little bit more on Nigeria, because it's a very unique nation in so many ways. And one of the things I hadn't mentioned was the tribes. There are 250 tribes in Nigeria amongst the 220 million people. And when you consider that's an extraordinary fact, it's even more extraordinary that there are 500 languages. But if I just go over the main tribes, and this is what I wanted to touch, to mention my father's tribe as well. The largest tribe is in the north, and they are the Hausa. One of my friends here is a Hausa gentleman, and they're extraordinary people with a beautiful sounding language, I must say. They reside in the north and are typically of Muslim faith, 25%. Next is the Yoruba in the southwest. I should probably get out the map, shouldn't I? And the Yorubas are in the Lagos-Ibadan area, from which my father hails from. And they are found here in the Lagos-Ibadan area. The Hausa inhabit the north up here. And then the next we have 18%, the Igbo tribe here. I work with an Igbo gentleman. He's an amazing man. They have a good reputation for being smart, Unfortunately, this was the area that wanted to succeed during that very unfortunate civil war that occurred. So the Igbos are down, down in the east, and they are 18% of the population. And then you have the Ijaw tribe, somewhat central, I do believe. This is the capital, by the way, that I didn't mark last time. You can see the square there. I hope I'm pointing to the right place. Abuja. There it is. Right in the middle, perfectly placed. And then you have the Fulani, who are somewhat nomadic, and we used to encounter when we were living in the north. And they love cattle, and they tend to move with the pastures. And they are 6%, the Fulani. And then on we go to many different tribes that live in this great land. In terms of the scope of the land, well, we lived in Lagos. Orange is where we lived, and the yellow is where we visited. So in terms of scope, if you go from Lagos to Kano, and if you were driving all the way to the north there, almost to the end there, that's 1,000 kilometers, about 988 kilometers. So if you're looking at the scale of how large this land is, it's pretty sizable. You've got 1,000 kilometers there. That's something else I wanted to do, always to give a little bit more context and expound this land. Another thing that I missed out is that I showed that our movements and why we lived in the north were very much dictated by my father's work, because he worked for the Nigerian railways. And I pointed out that the red is the railway tracks, and because it extended into the north, of course my father had duties up in the north because he had to inspect the line, see how everything was running. He was, after all, a civil engineer, make sure everything was working properly. But what I didn't mention was that the red tracks were non-standard gauge, slightly narrow, which is unfortunate because it doesn't fit quite with the more or less standardized gauge that the rest of the world's used. And in fact, that's the word, standard gauge. So since my father worked with the railways, since that time that he's retired all those years ago in 1978, there is this new line, and I'm determined to touch in the right place, that comes up, 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 up. You can see the different color. The non-red bit is this new track. If it's in white, it's under construction. But if it's yellow, it's already been constructed. So there are gaps where they're still making it. And furthermore, there's a track that opened a few years ago. Now I remember my friends telling me about it, Lagos-Ibadan. Much higher speed going from Lagos to Ibadan. This yellow line, standard gauge. And I remember thinking that my father would be very proud to think that this was progressing. A line going right through the middle of the country, because railway lines are a physical manifestation of unity. They really do unite a land and keep it tied together, because if the rail lines are all moving within a nation, it tends to have a certain cohesion. I think it's a subconsciously important fact. So he would have been very pleased by this, and I hadn't pointed out this new development that the Nigerian Railways is developing. One thing we could do with is a line crossing east to west. That would be uniting as well. But the north to south connection is very important. Christians in the south and Muslims in the north. It's about 50%, 50%, just very close, the Christians to the Muslims, which is probably a good thing. So neither can really dominate the other. I was also pleased to learn about the massive population of Kano being 4.2 million, showing that there's really some serious amount of population up there. I thought that there would be not as much because it's dry, and I was thinking, well, what's up there, you know? All the oil is down in the south, and all the greenery is in the south, but clearly they have a rich civilization going on there, stretching back centuries, and so I wonder if I'll get to see it again one day. So I just wanted to fill that in as well for completeness. And on the population, there was a little bit more that I could say. I'd already touched upon Lagos being 15.5 million down in the south, and Kano being 4.2 million, as I just said. large centre of populace. Remember, orange is where we lived and yellow is where we would frequently visit. Ibadan 3.8. My father comes from Ibadan here, a Yoruba man, as I said. And Abuja in the centre, where there was previously no one there, 20 plus years ago, is now 3.6 million. So that will probably grow and grow and grow. And this is the political capital of the Nigeria, and Lagos is the commercial capital. Port Harcourt down here, we didn't get to Port Harcourt, is 3.3 million. That's huge. And this will be the ultimate oil town because all the oil is down here. Most of the oil is down here. Benin City, there used to be a huge civilization called Benin, and still exists in the name there. The Benin City is 1.8 million. That's the next one. I was surprised that the population in the east is not as high as I would have thought. Onitsha is 1.5. Onitsha I am trying to locate on this map here, and I'm failing to do so. It'll come to me later, I'm sure, but it's in the east, in the area, or Middle East area. Surprisingly, Kaduna is in the top 15. Kaduna is the 1.1 million up here. So that's where my younger brother was born, Simon. It's surprisingly large, and recently he did talk to me about Ibadan, about Kaduna. So one of the things that I could flesh out. How's our light doing at the moment? It's looking good, getting a bit of reflection there. I pointed out the amazing fact that when my mother arrived, there were only 45 million people, and now there are 220. So here I've got a table that highlights the most important bands of the population. The bottom one is showing that 45 million when my mother arrived of population, and when she left in 1985 it was 83 million. So she witnessed more or less a doubling of population during her time there, from 45 to 83, not quite a doubling. Little did she know that it would blossom all the way to 220 million. This table is 200 million because it stops in 206 million, it stops in the year 2020, and 2 years have gone by and we've got 12 more million people. It really is racing up, and probably one of the things is oil brings a certain amount of prosperity, and I think has allowed the population to blossom faster than it otherwise would have, the oil wealth. But one of the things I mentioned was that in 1960, when my mother arrived, it was only 15% urbanized, people in cities, and now it's 50% or 55% in cities, or 52%. So there were only 7 million people in cities when my mother arrived, and now there's 110 million. And so I said, therefore, you can divide about 1/15 if you want to take the population now and find out what it was when it was 1960. Basically, you can divide by, about 12. You can divide by about 12. Because that's a huge amount, from 7 million to 110 million in the cities. So later on I'll tell you that I'd made an estimate of Lagos population by this metric, my approximate method, and it was pretty correct. It's staggering, and we'll touch on Lagos a little bit later. So meanwhile, when my mother arrived, the population of the planet was 3 billion. And now the population of the planet is 7.8 billion, more than a doubling, but Nigeria has gone 5 times. So the rate of growth of population in Nigeria is far ahead of the average population in the world. And as I said, I think this is one of the things that Nigeria has going for it. It has people, and a very, very energetic, ingenious people as well. We just need to orient ourselves in a direction that has cohesion. And my gosh, what a force that would be if we are able to pull that off. So that was to just add a little bit more for those of you that, like me, like to go a little bit more in depth with topics. because I did wish that I'd mentioned them the first time, but probably just as well. It was already a very long video, wasn't it? Another thing just to mention on the Nigerian railways, that when I said Dad had his own, I had to Google it, carriage. They're called carriages. He had his own railway carriage or rail carriage. In America, they call them railroad cars. And I kept saying it was a car, but that's an American thing, a rail car. So he had his own carriage. I think you know what that is. They're connected to each other, a whole load of carriages. And oh, it was exquisite. It had a little sort of, what should I call them? Well, they did call them servants. What can I say? It's a word that I'm trying to avoid. We call them houseboys as well. Anyway, there was someone that would serve you and that lived at the very end in a little kind of bunk. And then my father had a little bedroom, and then there was a couple of bunks for us kids. And then he had a living room, and his desk was there. The whole carriage was for him, and a little kitchenette. Of course, he didn't have to cook because the servant traveling at the end would do everything. And he'd take us with him on tour. He'd say, okay, let's go on tour. And can you just imagine at that age, going on one of these things with your dad? Absolutely ecstatically joyous it was to join him on this carriage. And it was kind of new as well. So it was in very good condition. Like everything in those days, it was rather new and pristine. So that was a memory I wanted to embellish. And then since the time I last recorded and spoke with you, I realized that the Oriole that I kept mentioning is quite famous. I mentioned it went from Liverpool to Apapa, which is a port in Lagos. And I mentioned to you that it ran from 1951 to 1974 on that route before the airlines took over and it just wasn't economic. And I said it was 8,000 kilometers, didn't I? 8,500 kilometers in 13 days, and I divided and I got 27 kilometers an hour, which is 15 knots. I checked the spec of the ship and it said, yep, it's a 15-knot ship, perfect. But what I wanted to say is if you think 27 kilometers an hour, that's fast. Just imagine going almost 30 kilometers in your car. I mean, it's no mean feat. That thing was really hoeing it along, wasn't it? Very, very impressive. And she was constructed in the River Clyde in Glasgow. Just imagine her being built all that time ago in 1951 by Alexander Stephen and Sons. I came across so many articles on the Oriole, and one of them was by a Nigerian journalist who spoke with so much emotion about this ship. And I thought, what is it about the Oriole that evokes these feelings? Well, they built three. They built the Accra, which is the capital of Ghana, the Apapa, which is the port in Lagos, and finally they built this Oriole. And the Oriole had the cleanest lines, the most graceful lines, and it cost as much as the other two combined. So it was the biggest and most impressive. They went all out for the Oriole. And even though it sounds a very kind of westernized name, it's named after a mountain in Sierra Leone, the Oriole. And it had these clean lines, and I found a color picture, which I'll share with you now. Last time I showed you a black and white. So there she is. There's the Oriole. And she went from 1951 to 1974 when the economics stopped the process. I think it was to 1971 from Southampton. Something happened from Liverpool. And the port of Liverpool was shut down for various reasons for passengers. It was only doing freight, so they had to move from Southampton. They weren't happy about that, but the last couple of years of its life, it came from Southampton, where my younger brother went to university. As you all know from the last story, if you're paying attention, there'll be an exam later and you tell me what he studied. So at that time it was bought by a Greek tycoon and renamed the Mariana IV. And I was surprised to learn that it sailed all the way up to Greece for a while, had a full refit in 1974, and then it headed to a little town down the road from Jeddah, the name I didn't write down, where it was used for accommodation. Then it actually did move to Jeddah, all on the Red Sea, where it was also used as an office/accommodation for many, many years, more or less from 1974 to 1989. Well over 10 years it was static as an office and accommodation. But in 1989, it was decided to, I'm not sure if it was resold, it was decided to move it back round to Greece again, and it went under its own steam with its original engines. You can see the huge chimney stack there, where it was, it arrived in 1989 in Greece, and it was laid up. There was no use for it. So for 12 years it was laid up there till the year 2000, and I have a picture of it, how it looked in the year 2000. Still see the graceful lines, but it was looking a little bit sad, wasn't it? Rusty. By the way, that was the full section. That's what it looked like, much longer when you see it that way. And then 2001, it fired up its engines again, the same original engines that it had the whole while. I said a sad end, the Mariana IV laid up in Greece, and it sailed through the Suez Canal under its own steam, all the way to a wrecking port called Alang, about 250 kilometers north of Mumbai on the eastern coast of India. That's what they do there, they break ships up. And in 2001, she was broken up for scrap, and that was the end of the Elegant Lady. And to my surprise, 10 minutes before I came on to record this, as I was still doing a little bit of research, I was amazed to find that there is a YouTube video, 10-ish minutes long or even more, which I haven't had time to watch yet, about the Oriole. But as I skimmed through, I saw something that was quite surprising to me. I might have told you that on my journey when I was 6 to 7 years old, coming back from North Wales to Ibadan, we'd left because of the Biafran War starting, the civil war, and then we were coming back to Ibadan. The war was still just about to be declared, but we were safe in the West. It was 1967. I told you that I was, by mistake, pushed into the pool. And I went down, and then I came up, and I went down, and I came up, and I thought, okay, I'm going down again. I don't think I'm going to come up again. And then I was unconscious. So there was, because there was no one around. And next thing I knew, I woke up on the side of the pool, and they were mouth-to-mouthing and pushing water out of me. So it really was quite a substantial event for me. And I remember the pool. I said to you in my last recording, it was a little square thing. And here it is. Exactly as I remember it. To a little 6-year-old, it seemed huge. The only thing that I don't remember is the sides seem quite more steep. Look at those people sitting on the end. And when I saw this just now, I thought the internet is absolutely amazing. We take it for granted. All these facts I'm throwing at you, just a couple of clicks and there they are. Really, really amazing. When I was young, there was no internet. So isn't that amazing? I shall look forward to watching that video on this now I see rather famous ship, the Oriole, the last of its kind, and it was called the White Swan because of its elegance. So what a privilege that I had to travel on this vessel. So that's something that I feel a little bit more satisfied now that I've done the Oriole justice, this great lady. My father traveled on the Apapa. I'm not sure if they traveled on the Accra. Mum traveled on the Apapa, and I think I probably traveled on the Apapa before I could form memories. So I'm happy to have gone over that with you. The other thing that I wanted to say, that there was just a little bit of a mistake which I found as I went through later. When I was reading Mum's book to you, I said that when she started writing it from what did she say? The journey begins. She started to describe the journey from in the ship from North Wales in 1960. She was ready to move down to Dad. The very first chapter, I said written in London, but it was written in Brunei, because now I understand what happened. Dad passed away in 2004. That's when she wrote her. Her preface about her. She expressed her lament at the loss of Dad in Nigeria, and she ended her preface by saying that I feel a great sadness and tears flow as I write my story. 2005. Busyness obviously overtook her, and it wasn't until 2008 when she came to me in Brunei. I've mentioned in my extended eulogy in another recording that the most sort of, what would you call it, quality time Mum and I spent was from 2001 to 2009, 8 years that I was in Brunei. 2002 actually, 2002 to 2010 to be more precise, because she'd retired, and in 2004 when Dad had passed away, so from 2004 to 2010, she's retired, she's not working anymore, Dad is no longer with her, I've got this lovely setup in Brunei, and she'd do Christmas and New Year with her people in London, and she'd rush off to me in the middle of January and spend sometime almost 3 months, at least 10 weeks. So she'd go mid-January, mid-February, mid-March, and then towards April. And once she stayed all the way till her birthday on the 8th of May. I remember celebrating her birthday with her on the 8th of May in Brunei. And she'd do that every year. And her friend would say, "Oh, Betty, you're off, eh, to escape the winter." And then she'd pop back to London in spring and said, "Hello, everybody." So she had this wonderful rhythm. It was a great time for my mum. So in 2008, of course, that's when she thought, look, I've got free time. What am I doing when Peter's at work? I'm going to sketch the outline. I'm going to start this book. So that's why she did indeed really only start the book in Brunei. I know my mum, and in London there were so many things in her routine that she wouldn't have left a room to sit and just write this book, but she could do it in Brunei. So it was all written in Brunei. The other thing that I omitted to say was my mother's age. All the way through, another thing to add a dimension was, what was her age? She was born in 1930. I didn't mention her age once, except when she said I was born in 1930. So that means that when she was crossing in 1960 to come across to start her life in Nigeria, she was already 30 years old. She wasn't particularly super young. She was a very mature woman with 2 children. Not an impressionable young lass, with a lot of teaching experience under her belt. She arrived as a mature individual with a lot to offer. So when she got to Nigeria at the age of 30, that was quite a considerable age. And as I said, we had 4.4 years up in the north, in the northern area, up here, 4.4 years, but there was some time taken out to escape to the to North Wales during the beginning of the Civil War, so that meant 6 years before we got to Ibadan. So when we finally came back from the UK, and in that trip on the Oriole, the one where I was pushed in the pool, she was already 36 years old, which to a young boy seemed like, wow, these were already old people to me at that stage. So that was quite something that I wanted to add. And then when we got to Lagos, after that stint in Ibadan, we were, it was 1972. Now, my mother was born in 1930, so that would have made my mother already in her 40s. She was 42 by the time she got to Lagos. And by the time we left Lagos, she was 48. As I mentioned, when my dad left the Nigerian Railways, they were both 48. And then she got to Ibadan, where she returned to teach in the All Saint Church School again, with the secretary still being the lovely Mrs. Oniinde, whom I think about every day, my dear Auntie Marion. She had the 11-year stint all the way through in Ibadan, and as I said, I hadn't realized just how long she was there because I was busy, all university, London working and all that first job. And there they all were getting on with it, living in Nigeria, in Ibadan, my father's hometown. And it was 11 years. So 1989, when she left, trying to do the maths, she was 59 years old. 59 years old. 90. Yeah, so that's extraordinary, and I think that's one of the reasons that my mother did make the move. Conditions were coming a little bit harsh, and I think she was feeling her age. She was 59 when she left, because, let's see, she hadn't arrived that young, as I've just said. How is our light? So at 59 years old, my mother left Nigeria, and I think that that puts a little bit more context on it, where she was in her life. And then she worked for 6 to 7 years in Peckham and retired at the age of 65, 66-ish. And then, of course, she had her, that put her to 1996, 97. And she had her son Peter to go and visit in Australia many, many times, and then to Brunei, and then to Thailand, and then to Qatar. My mother came here 3 times. She basically used to visit me on an annual basis wherever I was. So it was a great fit, I have to say it was. So that's the other thing I wanted to add for those of you that are interested. And then I had some other maps which I didn't even show. I had them ready, but I failed to show them. But I will just show them now. Just for completeness, as you know, orange places is where we lived, the yellow places is where we visited, and I put Abuja, the capital, in the center, and even here where we went on holidays to Togo, which you can just about see here. In fact, to be very pedantic, I will just pull out this, yes. This is another one I had prepared where, of course, we know the shape of Nigeria, but I wanted to show you. Benin used to be called Dahomey. Cotonou was the capital before, now called Porto Novo, and here's our beloved Togo. And there is Lomé, where we used to have those amazing visits and saw the giant sea turtles swimming off the sea, in the sea, and Ghana off here with the capital Accra. Not been. I only got that far, just to show, because I don't think it came out clearly last time. So now back to the geography lesson, if I should call it that. These are the places. So when we arrived in Lagos, we headed straight up to Abeokuta here. And I mentioned to you that the population is 0.5 million now. And we do our 0.6 million actually. We do our divide by 10 or divide by 12, and there would have been only 50,000 people there. So here, let's have a closer look at that. Lagos, you can see all these lovely estuaries and all that. It's an extraordinary place, Lagos. And you travel just a mere 80 kilometers, and you'd be up in Abeokuta. So this is where Mum started life. And I wanted to have a look at Abeokuta and think what is actually there, because it was famous for having a mental hospital in a suburb called Aro, A-R-O, and people would make jokes that if you didn't wise up or shape up, they'd send you to Aro because you were crazy. It was just a sort of saying. And look at the size of it now, 0.7, 0.6 million people. And there it is, it's still there. The Neuropsychiatric Hospital, Aro Psychiatric Hospital. For some reason, it's just decided to be a center of excellence for mental and brain diagnoses and issues. So it still has the mental hospital there. And the road to Ibadan would have headed off this way, where my mum and dad would have headed off to Ibadan to have their dances. 67 kilometers it would have been heading off to Ibadan. So that's what it looked like. That's what it looks like now. You can imagine how small it would have been at the time. And so here it is again. And Lagos with its 15 million people. You travel 80 kilometers and you get to 0.6 million people, Abeokuta. And Ibadan, where my father comes from, 3.6 million people. And we made this trip so many times because later we moved to Ibadan when we came back after the beginning of the Biafran War, after the trip to Wales. And then we finally moved to Lagos and then back to Ibadan again. 132 kilometers. We've made that trip. And this is where they have the new rail line that I just told you about. we'd head off to Akure occasionally. They have some waterfalls there that my mum and dad both loved, waterfalls, and some other touristic sites, historical sites. What's that, about 100 kilometers plus, just about. So this is the sort of scale of the thing, and the Yoruba land where my father came from. So I wanted to show you that, and then as we, what I'll mention about this 15 million people, I'll mention that in a second. And the other map that I wanted to elaborate is that in the north, I mentioned to you all that after the little stint in Abeokuta, we headed up here for 4.5 years to the north because of the railway tracks, as you now know. And it looks like this. So that's a blow up. There we are, arriving in Bauchi, 0.6 million people now. Heading up to Zaria, 0.7 million people. And heading up to Kano, 4.2 million people. And we crossed to Jos, 132 kilometers. 1 million people now. And then we would also cross to Kaduna, 1.1 million people, once we got to Zaire from my younger brother to be born in 1964. This was just for visits. It was high and it was cool. And yes, and when my mother told me on this trip, I now remember, she said, well, if you send a horse out somewhere, it'll come home quicker. I think it was because of the food. It would come home quick because it was going to get food. Wherever you left the horse, it would quickly return home. This is why I said, why is it always quicker when we come back, Mum? It seems so long when we're going there. So there was a certain logic, dear Mum, but that story is one of the first memories of my mum. And then the other thing is that Kano did have an airport, because when we left from Kano, I remember that I had a headache, and I was upset because I knew that we were fleeing, that we had not planned to go, but the violence was too much and we had to leave. So I was upset. I had a headache, and they looked and looked and looked, and they found Panadol for me, and they gave me I remember taking it on the plane before we headed off on the plane to leave from Kano. And when I checked the dates of the pogrom, or this is where they went around killing people from the east, that the war hadn't been declared, the violence, I think it was up to 30,000 people killed or something terrible, was from May to September 1966. So we lasted till August, and then we left. We couldn't take it anymore. We could see the writing on the wall. So we left in August. So when I checked the dates, that it corroborated my recollection of the dates that we left Kano to go to North Wales to sit it out for 10 months. One other mistake I might have made in my recount of my mum's life is that I calculated the first day in Abeokuta, where I've just said, the one with the mental hospital. Our first day, I said it was 10 months. It was actually 14 months. For some reason, I'd done the sums wrong. It was 14 months in that first day. So now that covers very nicely the in blowout form, and you can see Abuja, the capital, 3.6 million people currently, where it's been placed. This is in the middle of Nigeria. Little did we know how that would come to be created later on, which is a great importance to Nigeria. So the other, moving along chronologically, when we got to Ibadan, down now back in the south, where my father comes from, so now 1967, we're back here, and we are, yes, that's correct. And not too long after that, my Auntie Mary came, and she sent us comics, and I said we had the Beano, and it was the Dandy. Some of you might know, the Beano and the Dandy. And we had a little chick called Cheapy, and there's a lovely picture of my Auntie Mary holding this chick, Cheapy. So she was a big hit And even though the trip was surprisingly short, Mum said 2 weeks. To us it seemed longer. I remember taking her to the market, and she found it quite alarming at some of the sights and sounds in the market. And on an aside, later on we had a pet chicken that my brothers will remember, called Liberty, that we loved, and we kept looking one day for Liberty, and the houseboy had misunderstood us, and I misunderstood my mother and killed Liberty, and we just had her for dinner the night before, so we felt absolutely aghast that we'd literally eaten her without our knowledge, because as I mentioned, in Ibadan we had chickens and a bit of a farm. So that's what I can say about Ibadan. In Ibadan, one of my mother's and dad's best friends were the Latunjis, Uncle Dele and Auntie Jocelyn from the UK. And they had mixed children like ourselves, Yetunde and Toyin, and a young son called Boyega that I didn't get to know. And I mentioned that last month dear Uncle Dele passed away, and his daughters, Toyin, sent me this book of Dear Uncle Dele. He was such a wonderful uncle to us, and when my father passed away, he did so much work on winding up our affairs in Nigeria with our houses and divesting and other things that we needed to do. And he was a lawyer. When he'd come over to London, he'd always take Mum and I out for Indian meals, and he was a sort of larger-than-life, can-do sort of man. So I thought I would honor my dear uncle as part of this story, because I fondly remember going to visit him and seeing my auntie in Ibadan when we were there from 1966 to 1967 to 1972, 5 years of Uncle Dele, and of course in London, how he'd always come over. And I wrote a tribute to dear Uncle Dele that's in here, which I shall read, because it's part of the Ibadan experience, and he was an icon of Ibadan, and he loved Ibadan, and he loved to progress the Yoruba tribe as much as he could, and he was a very reliable friend to my father, and they really liked and hung out with each other quite a bit. And I've said as part of my eulogy, it's our great loss, our first visits to you in Jericho, Ibadan, to see our dear Auntie Jocelyn and yourself are still etched in my mind. When I was a young boy, I can never forget how you interacted so joyously with my father and mother, always a smile on your face and radiating positive can-do energy. My parents loved you and my dad treasured you. You were one of his best friends. I can still hear him saying your name, Dele, so many times. You would always treat us when you came over to an Indian meal. It seemed so expensive, but you, with your ever-present generosity, you took care of it all. And every single May the 8th, the phone would ring in our flat, and without fail, the words, "Happy birthday, Betty," would break my mum's face into a crease of joy. You never forgot. Such was the great bond of friendship between the Latunjis and the Omotosos. Your visits to our flat were equally joyous, and Mum would routinely take you briefly off the path with that delicious pork chop because he was Muslim. And I can absolutely still see the twinkle in your eye. When our beloved father passed, you couldn't do enough to protect our birthrights. You were our knight, and I am forever in your debt, sir. I hope you are right now, happily reunited with your old friend Femi. And he thanks you himself. I also know how sad you were to hear of the passing of our beloved mother, since I spoke with you myself just after. He was 92. He was amazing. He was just slightly younger than my mum. And may you now once again experience the joy of each other's presence. We miss you all so terribly much, and I hope we can all meet again. May those that remain and experience and especially your beautiful family, cherish the memories they made with you, pass on the lessons you have taught them, I'm sure there were many, and always remember the good times. I hope their memories of you help to quickly heal their hearts. I think that is extraordinary and a great tribute to you that through your care and attention you were able to spend so very long with your loved ones in this world. May you rest in the most perfect peace, dear Uncle Dele, after your great work here is complete. I know that you and Dad, if it's possible, would want to be with each other again. So, memories of you both, and memories of Ibadan. When my mother returned to Ibadan for the last 11 years, she rekindled her friendship with Uncle Dele and with Auntie Jocelyn. Really, there was a great affection between them. So then finally, keeping in chronology, we went for the first time to live in Lagos. I was still at boarding school in Ibadan, but every holiday I'd come down to Lagos and whoa, now I was in the chasing girls, wearing bell-bottoms and going to discos and discovering beer phase and parties that we used to have all over Lagos. Whoa, learning to drive, and yes, it was just that lovely time. So of course that would have taken me from 14 years old to 18 years old. I feel like I was older. Anyway, we lived in the Ebuta Metta Nigerian Railway compound, and Ebuta Metta means 3 harbours. And now there's a huge transit station there. Not transit, like a terminal. I saw a picture of, and once again I thought Dad would have been proud. And 15 million now, and I did my rough sums when I was doing the original video with you all. And I said, do the divide by 10 thing. I said about divide by 12, 1 million to 1.5 million. And then I sort of chickened out because I thought, that's tiny. And I made another estimate. I said, oh, maybe it was divide by 5, 3 million. I said 5 million tops. But to my amazement, I've tracked the exact population of Lagos. I have a huge year-by-year list of it here. And when we got there in 1973, I said 1.5 million, right? Now it's 15.4. And it was 1.7 million, almost exactly what I said. And it just amazes me how now it could be 15 million. And because when we got there to a young child, it already looked large. 1.67 million in 1973. It's a little bit smudged. Hardly anything. That's just a little bit bigger than the population of Perth, Australia, which is 1.2 or something, 1.3. And when we left in 1978, it was 2.3 million. Still small, still really not much there. There was traffic, but it wasn't too bad. So what a transformation, this nation. And also I said that in 10 years, the population of Nigeria would go from 220 million to 500 million, which is not correct. I think it's in about 30 years it goes to 500 million, not in 10 years. That would mean it would go like that. But it's tracked by the UN people that watch these things. 30-ish years, it'll get to 500 million. Just, can you imagine 500 million Nigerians? So that just adds a little bit of extra information on the story of Lagos. And I hope it's, for the purists, has been something that has been adding a little bit more context on the original recount that I've shared with you all. I'm pleased that I've had the opportunity to make this addendum. And I did not take the approach to re-record the other one to get these additional facts in. The only question is now, will I make a third video for bits that this one has missing, and hopefully not. I do thank you very much for the opportunity to share again these memories of my mother's life in Nigeria. And I didn't read the entire eulogy to Uncle Dele, but I touched upon the main points there. And I am so pleased that Mum's handwritten notes that are here still with me. Have a look at her writing, and you'll see why I had to type it. I'm so pleased that one thing led to another, of me thinking, well, I'll just read this out, and realizing I couldn't read the handwriting, and then thinking, well, I think I'll type it out, and then typing it, and then thinking, well, shouldn't I show them Nigeria, because what does it mean otherwise? And then I thought, well, it's a different place now. What population does it have? And then I thought, how did we get there? What's this boat thing? So it led me down the rabbit hole to make these videos. And I'm very pleased because they're a record of my mum. And at least someone will see them. And even in my own later years, maybe I will revisit them to know where I came from even better. And it can only be good to give myself, on a selfish note, a foundation that cements me further into the soil of this world. And one of my mother's great qualities was her grounded nature. No flights of fancy, my mother. She was always a realist. And she faced things. She didn't turn away from responsibility. And therefore she had less pain in her life because she faced all the difficult things up front and got them over with. As I praised her in the last video, discipline allowed her to have a fulfilling life and a successful life through discipline. Being not swayed by anything and staying in the middle path of moderation is what she always did, and we're all aspiring to pull that off ourselves and staying in the middle of the path. As I've gotten deeper into my mother's life, I've realized that there were some other things we did in the UK with journeys I took with her, where she showed me her land, and maybe I'll be able to do something with that. Glasgow, we went to North Wales, and incredible tours of south of England. Let's see what I can do with those particular journeys. So my roots were revealed to me of this incredible land, the United Kingdom. It's an extraordinary place. And having touched upon this Nigeria, also an extraordinary place. The preeminent African nation in a way. The place where, if greatness comes out of Africa, surely it's going to be Nigeria in generations to come. And our potential will be realized. Black Africans. I do believe that that's the case. So I feel all the richer for it, for the effort of having shared my mother. And I hope that she also is saying, well, Peter, thank you, but you could have made it a little shorter. But I've been pleased to delve into the detail, and I'm procrastinating just a little, seeing if I missed anything on my notes. But I think that I have most of it already here. So, Trailblazer Mum and Trailblazer Dad, thank you once again for all that you have given us, our family, and your sacrifices. I've learned a lot through doing this, and I feel fulfilled. It was a life left in Africa. We'll just have to let it ring out. In fact, we've been quite lucky to not have any interruptions in the whole number of minutes that I've talked with you, then I'll just have to, I don't think that can be edited out. Anyway, count my blessings for the uninterrupted space that we've shared so far, and thank you for your watching through to the end. And I hope that you've enjoyed some of the other videos of Mum, including the original long one. And enjoyed is not the right word, but that you've been happy that her memory is preserved, both for the day of her passing, in celebration of her life, her funeral, and so many of you participated. And I hope that you've also, on the other side, which has been my aim, balanced her life, not just in celebration of life on the day of her funeral, but truly in celebration of her life, to inspect it a lot closer. So the bits we haven't done is her growing up, her from teaching from the year 20 to the year, she grew up in Wales. She started teaching in her very early 20s till 30. We haven't done any of that, but we've done from 30 to 59. And when she got to London, there was 6 years teaching in Peckham. So we've done about 6 years of that till she was 65. And you know, from 65 till 85, she did a lot of traveling to see me. But I will perhaps do a little bit more on that later, about video of the travels within the UK with my mum. She finally hung up her flying boots in 2006. Sorry, 2016, when she was 86 or 85, I think was when she last took a plane. But then we started traveling within the UK, and her last trip was when she was actually 91. I took her in the car. Anyway, that shall all be presented another time, and thank you once again. I'm always reluctant to leave you. This is the reason I extend it a little bit, and I want to make sure that I don't miss anything out. So thank you for your patience and understanding. Sorry about that call, and it just shows that everything's real in real time here. So my love to you all, and thank you very much once again for listening to make this, my mother's life in Nigeria, complete. Thank you so much. Blessings to everyone. Thank you very much.